To David's surprise, dinner without any issues was a blessing. He introduced Kialan to Angela, spoke to Sergeant Hirth about this morning, and even saw Maya eating with Zaf, though he couldn't hear what they talked about. He was also informed by Alaris that she approved of Kialan's proposal as long as he doesn't mess it up. David sat down and ate a full meal for a change. He had some personal work to handle later, and his stomach felt like it was eating itself. After eating enough to think clearly, he raised his hand as he said to his communicator, "Gavi, please notify the human contingent that we have a morning briefing tomorrow at 11 o'clock. "Done," the AI responded. As he finished eating, he spotted Kiga leading Cole toward the research wing, and it seemed like Cole was moving alongside Kiga willingly. The following morning, David got up and got ready for what he hoped would be a calm day, however didn't place too much stock in it. He was set to observe the boarding action training, although he wished he could participate in it. When he reached the security offices, the members of his team were doing final checks on their equipment. All of them wore their void suits and carried an assortment of non-lethal weapons ranging from stun batons, tasers, and in Sergeant Hirth's case, a pump-action shotgun loaded with beanbags. A few of them also had a new weapon out of humanity's armaments catalog, a concussive sound wave projector. Though David never got to use one, he was excited to have a few on board. "You guys are packing some heat," David said as he walked up to them. "Well, we are basically going up against members of the crew to simulate an Op-4, Hirth said back, a bit hesitant. "I am just concerned we may do more than just knock them out. Most of these are meant to stop us, not them." David thought about it. The sergeant was right and also wrong. Most of these have never been fired at the species that make up the crew. However, they have been fired at raiding parties and pirates with no lethal outcomes. "Well, I see your concern, but they are used all over the Republic to deal with bad actors and outlaws. So I think it should be fine." Hirth pondered the information for a second before turning to the assembly and spoke loudly. "Set the CSWP to 75% power. As much as I would like to use them at full power, we don't know how it will affect our crew members acting as the Op-4. "Yes, Sergeant," the troopers responded. David looked at them with a bit of longing. He missed the simplest of military life. Not soon after he began his daydream, he snapped out of it by the landing of a heavy cushion-like hand on his shoulder. "The chief wants to speak to you before the exercise," said a security guard, gesturing his head to a door marked Surveillance. "Yep, I'll head over, thank you," David replied in a quick fashion and walked over and entered. As David walked in, he saw the chief of security, a tall cloacash with a patchy coat of black and tan fur sitting on his hindquarters and hands free to gesture, his short and squished face with 3 eyes equidistant above a large maw of flat herbivore teeth. Next to him was a Larashi, which David didn't recognize but looked familiar somehow. She was evidently a female by the layout of her plumage and her colorful feathers. She has a hooked beak, but her eyes showed signs of sleepless nights. David didn't have the time to ponder this fact too long and walked up. "Chief, you needed to see me?" he said, trying to speak in the silence between the conversation. The chief looked over at David. "Yes, I did. However, first let me introduce Duchess Jai Alia Hirasil. She is the ship matriarch," the chief said with an open hand to the Larashi next to him. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Duchess. I am David Solomon, liaison officer to the human contingent on board," David said with a low bow, hands spread out and arms pointed back and away from him. "It is a pleasure to meet you. Both my father and Giav have spoken of your diplomatic expertise, and Alaris claims that you make your republic proud," she said, returning the grand gesture. "I am sorry, but you said father, but I haven't met any other nobles aboard. May I ask who you are talking about?" David asked through carefully chosen words. She let a shy squawk escape. "Oh yes, my father is the captain of this vessel. He had to renounce his title and lordship to be a part of the Council Expedition Corps." "I see. That is good to know. I was unaware of such laws within the Council community," David said thoughtfully. "Well, Chief, you wanted something?" "Yes, we would like for you to settle our bet." The chief shifted a bit as he spoke. "I believe that the distance that your herd would need to cover before reaching the training area is far enough to exhaust them. And I believe that it is not, and the training area should be moved to a deeper part of the vessel." the Duchess added. David looked over at the holomap nearby. He also needed more information. Gavi, can you display all routes to the area designated for training along with their distances? The whole map lit up with 2 lines that show paths to the training area from the security office. It would be approximately 9/10 of a mile along both paths, Gavi said. David reached for the whole map and began to plot a course of his own. It ran right out of the security office to the open atrium and straight down to the floor of the training area and through the corridors to the start point of the exercise. How far would that path be, assuming the fall rate is me? 1 moment, Gavi responded. About the same, but if they take it, the overall ground they would need to cover would be about half a mile. David turned back to the security chief. That's the path they will take, and no, it will not tire them out. The average human soldier can cover that distance easily, but the lower gravity of the ship will allow us to take risks like falling 10 floors, he said, pointing at the path he made. If you want to tire them out, you will need them to lap every floor on their way down to the training area. Both the Clocash and the Duchess looked like they had heard the most ludicrous thing in all existence. I see, the security chief, perhaps another time. I don't believe that having heavily armed humans lapping the ship at full speed is a good idea, added the Larashi Duchess. I wholeheartedly agree. I would recommend a second training session. David confirmed. I will be happy to advise you on it too. Well, I guess there isn't the time to modify the training anymore, the chief said as he stood and walked over to the microphone. Human Task Force, we have isolated hostilities in Deck 30 Sector 77. Move out and capture the assailants. The whole task force immediately began to move. The Duchess and the chief seemed to be struggling to watch them as they moved. Then they all came to a standstill just outside the office, and David knew exactly what they were saying. I bet they are about to take the route I pointed out, the chief snorted. They are humans, but soldiers. They will take the stairs. The chief countered. I agree, the Duchess added. The humans seemed to make up their minds and handed out some rope, and all of them ran straight to the atrium while pairing off. One carried a length of rope and came to a braced stop by the rails, while their partner jumped straight over and let the rope slow their descent. As soon as they had their boot on the ground, their partners jumped, but with a lot more force, like they planned to land on the other side of the atrium. About a third of the way through the jump, their trajectory changed as their partners pulled hard on the rope. This type of maneuver is normally impossible to do, but with high-power exomuscles in their suit and an integrated AI, it was made into child's play. David turned to the Duchess and Chief with a controlled smile. Well, good thing we didn't say what we are betting. The task force immediately after regrouping made their way to the section of the ship that the training was in, slowing their speed as they did. Soon, the sound monitor didn't even notice their steps. They had become like ghosts, barely making a sound aside from the occasional shift of equipment. Then they reached their starting point. The larger cargo hold's doors were left open, and David saw 3 Xandraphane security personnel on the other side with weapons ready. This is Hearth to security. We are in position, he said through the radio as he watched the closest camera to him, requesting to cut power to the lights in this section. The chief looked to David. Can your kind see well in the dark? No, but their void suits have a built-in heads-up display, so they can while their helmets are on. It's a standard tactic of Republic forces. You can say yes and play along or no and make it harder for Hearth and the task force. I would like to see them try harder, would you do it? The chief said after a short pondering. Hearth, this is ship security. We have lost control of power systems in the area, David said into the microphone. Confirmed. David watched as they stacked up by the door and prepared. 2 of them pulled out smoke grenades, and one of the others pulled a flashbang. The first one in the stack, Miller, pulled a cord from under his vambrace, held it to the door and twisted it a few times, making it move around. He then made a few hand signals to the rest of his team. What is that? Asked the chief. Micro camera linked to his suit. He has just informed his team about the 3 Xandraphane on the other side, David said back, not taking his eyes off the screen. Then the task force executed a fast and aggressive attack, The 2 smoke grenades were thrown a short bit away from the door, setting the stage for a fake attack from the other side of the door, while the flashbang was fastball thrown at one of the Xandraphane, who seemed more shocked by the small object, the bounce off his armor, than the sudden brightness and ear-shattering thunderclap. The team ran in a second after the flashbang, tasering one and knocking the last Xandraphane to the floor with a crossfire shockwave from the CSWPs. Their movements were a bit more sloppy than David would have liked, but they did it, however. They gave the element of surprise to their opponents. David saw the 2 Klokash making their way to the task force. He was still determining what they carried on their backs, but it would be a good chance to see what the Klokasny weapons were like. The 2 rounded the corner and charged the task force. David could tell the task force could barely see what was charging them through from their reaction, but Hirth quickly countercharged. He tackled one of the Klokash while kicking his foot at the lights on the other. Most humans, even in combat void suits, wouldn't stand a chance, but Hirth was the odd one out. Between his implants and suit, he could for sure match a Klokash in strength, and he was on top of that, buying his team enough time to overpower the second Klokash. The cargo bay quickly devolved into a few slightly different iterations of the same events. It took the team about an hour and a half to finish, but they did. "Well, I for one am more than impressed by your herd's performance," the chief said, thoroughly pleased with the showing. "Yes, your team handled the whole affair well," the Duchess added. "Yeah," David half-heartedly said. "Task force exercise complete. Everyone head back to the security office," the chief said over the intercom to the cargo bay.